Standard 6 is the perception of place and regions. In Standard 4, we looked at the physical and human characteristics of place, and in Standard 5, we looked at regional geography. Both Standard 4 and Standard 5 are very closely linked to Standard 6, the perception of place and regions. In this section, we're going to look at how culture and experience influence people's perceptions of places and regions. The way in which people all over the planet perceive of their place of origin and other places in the world is a result of their own culture and experience. That is, each of us sees places at once similarly to, as well as in contrast to or relative to another place. How one person sees any place or any world region is largely dependent not only on the physical and cultural features of that place, but also on how he or she feels about that place or region. Our perceptions of places and regions, then, are both subjective and objective at the same time. It is very important for teachers and students of geography to understand that while there are certainly natural and cultural characteristics that places and regions exhibit that help to distinguish them from other places, there is simply not one single definition or interpretation of any place or any region in the world. In Standard 5, the section of this course on reading and interpreting regions, we saw that there are several types of regions: formal regions, functional regions, and perceptual regions. In Standard 6, we focus on the functional and perceptual types of regions and places. How humans use or interact with the places in which they dwell also influences how they will perceive that place or region. Therefore, the utility of a place in meeting the needs of those who dwell there and rely on it is important. For instance, the forests in the Pacific Northwest are useful and meaningful to different people for different reasons, depending on the value they place on these forests. How we value something and what it means to us is a key factor in the perception of place and region, and thus how we choose to interact with it. Think of 5 places or regions in the U.S. and in Arizona that have different meanings, values, and utility for diverse segments of the population. When we grow up in a particular place, we come to know that place on an intimate level. We know something of the history of that place, who is who in town, where the significant or unique physical and built environment, places, and spaces are located, the politics of that place, both good and bad, and myriad other details. How we grow up, then, our life histories, in part, help to determine how we feel about a place. In addition, as we live in, travel to, read about, or learn more about any place or region, our perception of that place or region can change. It deepens, it broadens. Perceptions are not static. Places and regions are not just compilations of natural and built features, but also places of shared beliefs, significance, and values, which in turn shape the culture of a place or a region. The map on this page is called the 9 Nations of North America. In 1981, Joel Garreau, a journalist for the Washington Post, created this now very famous perceptual map of what he referred to as the 9 Nations of North America. He identified each region by economic activities or historic reference or social attitude. As we look around this map clockwise, we can see several regions: Quebec in Canada, the New England region, the Foundry, Dixie, the Islands, Mex-America, the Breadbasket, Ecotopia, and the Empty Quarter. Looking at these regional designations, then, answer the following questions. Why do you think Garreau named them as he did? What was the value and significance of each of these areas of this country? Looking at it and studying it more closely, do you think the regions are still relevant, or have our perceptions of them changed, or have they in reality changed? Are there any new nations that should be identified? Any nations or regions that should be deleted? For example, the region around the Great Lakes that Garreau called the Foundry is a reference to what was what was once called the manufacturing belt of the United States. Today, because the manufacturing industry has declined dramatically in the U.S., this region has become known as the Rust Belt. What other regions do you think have changed in this country? The definition of the word culture is complex. Culture refers to a group of people's way of life, their commonalities, their philosophies, their religion, politics, social structures, economics, and the norms of behavior in that place or region. Looking at the definition on this page, we can see that there are 12 different entries for the word culture. The ones that a geographer is most concerned with are definitions 3, 5, and 6, and 8, 9, and 10. The third definition is a particular form or stage of civilization as that of a certain nation or period, such as the Greek culture. Definition 5 says the behaviors and belief characteristics of a particular social, ethnic, or age group, the youth culture, the drug culture, and so on. The sixth definition is an anthropological definition and also human and cultural geography, the sum total of ways of living built up by a group of human beings and transmitted from one generation to another. Definition 8 is the act or practice of cultivating the soil, tillage. Number 9, the raising of plants or animals, especially with a view to their improvement. And number 10, the product or growth resulting from such cultivation. The way I learned the definition of culture was a simple one-line definition: transmitted, learned behavior. A region is an area of land space that has characteristics or features that unite it and define it or describe it. It is a way for geographers to compartmentalize or make sense of or compare and describe the planet. We can look at physical regions, cultural regions, political regions, and so on, and we can look at the overlap between those regions. The shared notions of a group of people in one place or region has a great influence on how they perceive or how they feel about other places or regions in the world. Teachers and students of geography must be aware of how our own culture and norms impact our perceptions of place, as well as our perceptions of other places. Looking at the 3 photographs on this slide, we see the Pacific Northwest forests. We see the spotted owl, and we see deforested lands in the Pacific Northwest. Different stakeholders and different residents of this region will have different views and different perspectives when they look at these photographs. A logger, for example, sees these forests as his or her livelihood. The forests may in fact be the way in which several generations in any particular family have earned a living. Thus, there is a great personal meaning attached to these old-growth forests. The forests have personal, historic, and economic significance for these individuals, families, and indeed entire communities in the Pacific Northwest. On another hand, an environmentalist sees the temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest as home to the spotted owl, a threatened species, and therefore an environmentalist places a different value on the forests, a preservationist's perspective. What's your perspective about the Pacific Northwest forests? Another example of the perception of place. What do you see in the picture below? It's a picture of a model home on a former forest and farmland that developers are trying to sell to potential buyers. If you are the developer, you may see dollar signs. Perhaps you've purchased farm and forest land for an exceptionally good price, and now you are developing it and selling lots and houses. If you are a potential buyer, you may love the idea that this beautiful home is located in a peaceful and green site away from the noise and traffic, with plenty of area for children to play and quaint pastoral views to look at from your magnificent deck. If you are an environmentalist, you may see nature being destroyed by urban sprawl. If you are a nearby farmer, you may perceive an intrusion or disruption or invasion of what you've known as good, quiet country living. You may wonder how many old farmsteads are being sold off. You may wonder if you're the last holdout and if you'll end up surrounded by these giant homes that obscure your own views. Will your taxes rise? Will you be forced to sell? Maybe you are a farmer ready to retire and your children don't want to take over the farm, so you may also want to sell it to the highest bidder and see development as an opportunity for you in your retirement ages. If you are a city person out for a casual Sunday drive in the country, maybe you'll decide to go in another direction where the forest country views still remain. What's your perception? On the slide on this page, you see an old map of the city of New Orleans. New Orleans is one of our most historical places in this country. What's your perception of the city of New Orleans, Louisiana? What do you consider its significance? How do you think the following demographic groups perceive this city? Longtime residents of New Orleans and the surrounding area, the Cajuns. Wealthy versus poor residents of the city. For this, think Hurricane Katrina and the lower Ninth Ward and the destructions in it. What about newly arrived immigrants to the city? Vietnamese, Hispanic, others. What about tourists who pack in the city of New Orleans and sit and enjoy beignets at the Café du Monde or walk down Bourbon Street and listen to some of the great jazz music? What about outsiders watching the news on TV over the past several years, post-Hurricane Katrina and the BP oil spill in the Gulf region? Each one of these groups will have a very distinct perception of New Orleans. Another of our great cities with historical significance is Washington, D.C. It conjures up notions or perceptions of the seat of the U.S. government, politics and politicians, national monuments, foreign embassies, the Smithsonian, National Geographic headquarters, and the headquarters of many other nonprofit organizations. It also is recognized as a place having one of the highest crime rates in the country, as well as a place where there are very high incomes alongside very low incomes. There are a lot of ways we can look at and perceive Washington, D.C. How do you perceive Washington, D.C.? Likewise, Disneyland, another place, a manufactured place, means very different things to local residents, merchants, and tourists, both local and from abroad. In addition, metaphorically, Disneyland is often used when we refer to a fantasy or a dream world. Again, one's perception of a place or a region depends in part on who you are and your knowledge and experience of a place or a region. More on the personal, cultural, and ethnic significance of a place or region. Imagine the Deep South, a plantation perhaps. A white visitor to a plantation today might focus on the beauty and enormity of the house and grounds, and the antiques in the house and the opulence of a place. A black visitor, on the other hand, has probably a very different perception of this same place. The painting on this slide is by Clementine Hunter. It's called Hoeing Corn, and it's a very personal depiction of Clementine Hunter's experience on a plantation. A black resident or visitor may instead focus on the slave quarters, or the labor, or see or recollect what is not in plain sight, but instead the feelings that he or she derives from the significance of a plantation in the Deep South in the pre-Civil War period. And these perceptions are very likely different and conjure up a distinct image or perception of that place than the white visitor. What are some of the other factors at play in the perception of a plantation in the Deep South? A white person and a black person's history, understanding, and experience of a place, or their ancestors' experience of a place, will have a lot to do with how these two groups regard a plantation. A white person from the South may have a sense of belonging or affinity with plantation owners. A black person may have an affinity with slaves on the plantations and perhaps will feel alienated from it or a revulsion toward it. A northern white visitor or European visitor versus a white visitor from the Deep South may also have a distinct perception of the place. A white visitor from the North or a European visitor will have an outsider perception or perspective, while a white visitor from the Deep South will have an insider perspective. What is your perspective? In this slide, we're going to look at place and region, ethnocentrism, multiculturalism, and stereotyping. Some more themes that are at play in the perception of place and region. As the slides and examples in this unit show us, how we perceive of a place or a region or a culture is both objective and subjective at the same time. Human beings bring their own upbringing, knowledge, and life experiences into their perception of a place, for better or for worse. It is important for geography teachers and students to understand how and why they perceive their own place or region or culture as they do. And it's also important to understand why they perceive other places, regions, and cultures the way they do. Therefore, if we are aware of how and why we feel the way we do about a place, a region, or culture, we can better understand and appreciate our own place or culture as well as those of others. Further, the more we understand and appreciate places, we avoid stereotyping and prejudiced ideas about places, regions, and cultures. We should be observing them through this heightened awareness and appreciation and through others' eyes. Doing this, we are better able to embrace a true multiculturalism that reflects the evolution and demography of this country. And we can look at it with a more encompassing geographic eye. Some final thoughts on the perception of place and the value of nature. Apart from, or a part of. In the foreword to his classic book on the perception of nature, a Sand County Almanac, first published in 1948, Aldo Leopold wrote, "There are some who can live without wild things, and some who cannot. Like winds and sunsets, wild things were taken for granted until progress began to do away with them. Now we face the question whether a still higher standard of living is worth its cost in things natural, wild, and free. We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. How we perceive a place, then, or how we perceive nature, is directly related to how we will interact with that place or with nature. How do you perceive nature? What is its value and significance to you? Is it a commodity belonging to us? Or is it part of the community in which we live and dwell together as human beings? Do we feel apart from it, or do we feel a part of nature? This unit, Standard 6, Perception of Place, by Beth Larson, Lecturer, School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning, ASU, 2010.